Well, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up today to our Korean War and Prisoner of War Missing in Action Remembrance Day. Wish a lot more people from our community were here today, but I do want to thank you all for coming out and being a part of this. This is one of our most important programs that we do throughout the year, where we remember our prisoners of war and our missing in action, who are all too often forgotten unless we're a family member, but also our veterans of the Korean War, which in itself, through the passage of time, became known as the Forgotten War as well. And here at the Veterans Memorial Museum, of course, our focus is that no one will ever be forgotten, especially those that you have served our country so valiantly, and especially the ones that have given their lives, and even the ones that are still yet to be accounted for. Would you all bow your heads with me as we open this in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for gathering us together at this moment to remember our Korean War veterans and to celebrate and remember our former prisoners of war and those that are listed as missing in action. Father, we ask that our Korean War veterans will not be forgotten. We ask that our prisoners of war will never be forgotten. And we ask those that are still missing in action that they will not be forgotten. But yet, Lord, that you would bring the people, that you would bring the researchers to help to find our missing in action and to give them a final accounting, Lord. And we thank you for the work that has been done in this means. Father, be with us today as we gather to celebrate these times. We ask this in your Son's name. Amen. For those of you who have been around the museum a long time, you've known that we've had a Korean War Day, and back when my predecessor started the museum, they also had a POW MIA Day. And I think back when we were doing the POW MIA Day as a separate event, there were something like 53 veterans in the local area that had been former prisoners of war from either World War II or Korea who had come to the events. But as time has passed, they began to get fewer and fewer in number. And so then before I came here, Lee actually decided to combine the two for the Korean War veterans and the prisoners of war MIA Remembrance Day. And it has been very, very difficult to find speakers from the Korean War veterans. So those of you that are in the crowd today, if you would like to be next year's guest speaker, you're more than welcome. Would love to have you. And so in this case, what we would normally do is have a veteran from the Korean War speaking and giving their testimony of what happened, shedding some insight and some hope, hopefully. And then usually we would transfer into the POW MIA section, where usually it was very, very hard to find a speaker. We usually would do some sort of presentation. Well, this year we have a little bit of different. We have actually family members of Private First Class Gerald Knight, whose remains were recovered back in 2011. And he was repatriated to the United States in 2012. So the Kight family members will be giving a presentation about him. But I'm going to tell you about my great uncle. And he was Sergeant William Asbury Jr. He was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War. I never met him. He passed away in 1993. What's very interesting is that he literally is the black sheep of the family. He was always somebody that I knew about. When my grandparents passed away in 2006, this was my grandmother's brother. And I found a small little box with some photographs in it from Korea. And in talking with my dad, oh, that was your Uncle Bill, or great Uncle Bill. And I always had heard a few of the stories, and I will tell you some of those stories that I heard, and then share a little bit more about some of the interesting parts of his life. But Sergeant Asbury, his entire family had grown up in Merced, California, and eventually there would be 3 generations of Marines. William Asbury Jr., who's there, the older gentleman to the right, was his father, and Bill Asbury III is there to the left. We do not know who the individuals are to the left and the right, but we believe the individual to the left was actually the neighbor, and that was his son. And this was just at the beginning of, I think it was June 1950 was when this photograph was taken. William Asbury was born in 1892 in Merced, California, and he was in the joined the Marine Corps during World War I. He volunteered, however, he volunteered a little bit too late and was never sent overseas. He basically finished training in November of 1918, and then the war ended, and he was never sent overseas. But he was a Marine, and the family said that he was very, very proud to be a Marine, which is probably why Bill, when he came of age, joined the Marine Corps. I remember my grandmother talking about her brother Bill, and she basically summed it up as this, in that Bill was born in the wrong century. She said that if he had been born in the Middle Ages, he would have been just fine. He did not believe in rules, he did not believe in regulations, he did not believe in law whatsoever, but he joins the Marine Corps, right? One of the problems that I found out when I was trying to do research was I did National Archives research, and that's, for those of you who want to find anything about a loved one or a family member, the National Archives is a great way of doing that. If you're interested, come on by, give me a call, I can help you do that. Well, I wanted to find out about my Uncle Bill's military career by getting his records. And I had these photographs, just these few photographs of him, and that was it. Well, what came back to me was his DD-214 for an individual named William Jefferson Asbury Jr. Now, Jr. was his dad, but his dad was not born in 1926. And so I kept looking at these records going, what's going on, what's going on? And so I ended up talking to my father, and he says, you need to talk to your aunt. So I talked to my aunt, and she said, oh, when he joined the Marine Corps in 1944, he was wanted by the law. So in order to join the Marine Corps, to get away from the law of Merced, California, he used his father's name of Junior. And they trained him as a field artillery crew, and he served, unfortunately I was not able to find out his unit, but I knew that his MOS was field artillery crewman, and he has 1 battle star on his specific campaign medal. But then he was also awarded the China Expedition Medal, so he was a China Marine, which made sense since he returned in November of 1946 to the United States. Or August of 46, he returns from China. And he went back to Merced, California, and these are some pictures of Merced, California. The family business was in apricots and honey. My father told many times of actually working on his grandmother's apricot orchards, and then also being stung so many times from the bees. We were talking more about Bill when I was preparing this presentation, and Dad recalled another story where Bill was riding one of these trucks, and he was making a delivery of honey, and so he has cases and cases of all these mason jars filled with honey in the family farm truck, and he's driving through the hills of California when he's going down a hill when one of the brakes started to fail. And so he loses brakes, and he's careening around corners, and honey's flying all over the place. And as he's trying to control this and slow the truck down, he ends up hitting one of the posts, which was a little 6x6 wooden post painted white, sticking out there as a marker to tell you not to go off the edge. And he noticed that it slowed the truck down a little bit. So all the way down the hill, he kept hitting these 6x6 posts until he finally slowed the vehicle down. Of course, he was doing this to save his own life and not crash into anybody else, but then the state of California sent him a very hefty bill for replacing all of these 6x6 posts, in which he told my father, hit the other car, don't hit the posts, it's cheaper. In 1948, he married Norma Davison, and they had a son a year later, who was William Asbury IV. This photograph right here was taken just before they were shipping out to Korea. He had risen to the rank of corporal during World War II, and so when he re-enlisted, again, we don't know whether he was wanted by the law at this time or not, but he was reinstated as a corporal. However, what they ended up putting him in is as a forward observer. And so in November of 1950, he was with the 1st Marine Division. And this was actually a Christmas card that he had sent home in 1951 to his mother. And of course, he arrived just in time with the 1st Marine Division to be surrounded by the Chinese at the Chosin Reservoir. And later he told my dad, he said, I never knew that cold could hurt so much. And for those of you that were in Korea during those cold winter months, I'm sure you can relate to that. This is where the legends start to take off, and I kind of had heard about the stories as he was a forward artillery observer. In the box was this photograph, and there's a little plume of smoke right out here, and he had written on the back, "One of my artillery," so obviously he was a observer there and calling in the artillery strikes. I have no idea where in Korea this is, but it's got pine trees, that's what I know. On June 3rd of 1951, he was wounded in action during the Chinese Spring Offensive, where he received his Purple Heart. He was evacuated to a MASH unit, and this was apparently taken, I'm guessing, probably while he was recovering or something. I have no idea how badly he was wounded, but this is a MASH unit. One of the interesting things that goes on with the Asbury family is this individual, Brigadier General Crawford Sams, who is his uncle on his mother's side. And General Crawford Sams is one of these very interesting individuals in the military. If you notice, he has paratrooper jump wings. Very, very odd for a medical officer to have parachute jump wings. But apparently, when he was about 20 years old, he was jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. And this was shortly after World War I. And he was the inventor of the actual oxygen bottle that our pilots during World War II would use when they parachuted at high altitude, because as a aspiring medical technician, he realized as high airplanes get higher and higher and higher, and they jump out of these airplanes where the air was thinner, they would pass out and not be able to open their parachute or make a successful jump. And so he actually went through Fort is it Benning, where they do the paratroopers? Yeah, he was one of the first graduates of the paratrooper school there. But one of his other ones that was top secret for many, many years was his mission into North Korea in March of 1951. When he served in the China-Burma-India Theater during World War II, and then took part in the occupation of China and Japan. And being a medical officer, he studied very extensively the problems with prisoner camps and diseases that would run through them. He was also the witness of bubonic plague that had broken out in China. Well, the intelligence from the United Nations mission in Korea found out that they believed that there was an outbreak of the bubonic plague. And so to investigate this, they actually inserted him and 3 other individuals into North Korea where this outbreak was happening. Under the cover of darkness, they were there for 2 days gathering information, trying to figure out what was going on, working with other spies in North Korea. to find out that it was not bubonic plague, but it was actually a hemorrhagic fever that was attacking North Korea at the time. And then on the second day, they were able to get back out of there. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for this. Bring it up, it's kind of an interesting thing. We have the black sheep of the family, and then we have the hero of the family. So, but eventually, Bill returned. Notice I said that he really didn't obey rules or laws or anything like that. Here is a picture of him. He's on the left. He has a beard and a mustache and is smoking a pipe. Everybody else was supposed to be clean shaven for those of you that were in the Marines. Of course, this is not regulation. Well, Bill got away with it because when he would, as a forward observer, the legend has it, and of course I really can't confirm or deny anything about this, but legend has it, and the story was confirmed by many other family members. He would go out into the fields on his own, and he said there was one time he told my dad when he was a young boy that he took 2 other guys with him, but they were eating the wrong food. They weren't eating the North Korean food, so they smelled like Americans. They were loud. They didn't know how to go out into the woods. What he would do is he would slip out with his .45 sidearm, and that was it. And he would go out into no man's land and get as close to the North Korean lines as he could. And he would say that what he would do is he would try and find officers. And he said he would hunt officers like you would hunt deer. You just sat and you waited, and you waited, and you waited. And eventually they would start going to the bathroom on some side, they'd walk away from everybody. And that was where he would then sneak up on them, draw his .45, put it to the back of their head, and tell them in Chinese and then Korean, come with me or die. And so he would bring back these prisoners. And because he kept bringing back all of these officers, his commanding officer really didn't mind too much that he didn't shave. He would strip them down to their underwear and bring them back. And this was what he wrote back on one of his photographs. You can see this individual right here, hands above his head and in his underwear. That's one of the officers that he's bringing back. Another story said, which was why I decided to investigate his records, was that he had received a Silver Star for this, but had turned it down or thrown it away or something. But there was no record of him receiving a Silver Star for this. He comes back from Korea in 1952, and then his son, William Asbury IV, would also join the Marines in 1967 and was wounded during the Tet Offensive in Vietnam in 1968. His son is still alive, but did not know where Bill ended up. Bill ended up divorcing his wife in 1956 and disappeared. And he would show back up. He actually joined a motorcycle gang, and every once in a while he would show up at family reunions, usually on his motorcycle with some girl in the back, pregnant or not pregnant. We actually have no idea how many children that he had sired or where they are or anything like that, but he was just kind of the black sheep of the family, like I said. In 1993, he passed away in prison because he had been caught poaching deer out of season and died of a heart attack in a jail there in California. Why tell about my Uncle Bill? Even though he has just this kind of dark side of the family history, yet he was still a Korean War veteran. He was still a World War II veteran. He served maybe in World War II to get away from the law, but he still served. And I think that is something that's deserving of honor and should not be forgotten. I kind of find it funny that a lot of my family is just, Uncle Bill, yeah, he's not somebody to talk about, but I think after finding that box of these photographs of him in it was one of those things that just struck a chord with me. And I wanted to take this time for our Korean War veterans to remember my great uncle, William J. Asbury III, and thank him for his service. This time, we have, this is where we want to recognize our veterans, our Korean War veterans that have come. I know many of you, I don't think any of you are black sheep like my Uncle Bill. But who knows? I'll leave that to your family to tell me that or not. We have the very lovely Miss Kaylee Dahl, and she is Kylie Dahl, I'm sorry. And as I call your name, if you would please rise, she has a gift of thanks for you from the Veterans Museum. James Kaiser, Sergeant, United States Army, 5th Regiment Combat Team, served from 1952 to 1953. Robert Meyer, Major, United States Air Force, Weather Service, 1950 to 1953. Also, United States Army, World War II, and former prisoner of war. Good to see you, Robert. Jim Long, Seaman First Class, Gunner's Mate, United States Navy, 7th Naval Division, 1950 to 1953. Randy Roberts, Petty Officer Second Class, United States Navy, USS Castor, from 1950 to 1954. Larry Campbell, Private First Class, United States Army, 822nd Engineering Aviation Battalion, 1953 to 1954. Leo Klosner, AOM, 3rd Class, United States Navy, VP 42, from 1950 to 1952. Robert Brienza, Airman, 1st Class, United States Air Force, 3rd Bomber Squadron, 1952 to 1953. Bill Logan, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, Headquarters of the 8th Army Advance, 1953 to 1955. Donald Dees, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 1st and 3rd Marine Division, 1951 to 1955. William Feibig, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, Terrier Guided Missile Battalion, from 1952 to 1955. John Pedersen, Seaman First Class, United States Coast Guard, United States Coast Guard Heather, and the United States Coast Guard Oak, buoy tenders, 1954 to 1958. There are so many Korean War veterans that unfortunately are no longer with us that were such a part of this museum. Nobody will forget the Master Gunnery Sergeant Jack Williams, who joined and served in Marine Corps Aviation back in 1951 to 1953. Another one was, I think it was also Master Gunnery Sergeant Ron Harmon, who was also Marine Corps Division, 1st Marine Corps Division. And Ernie Dickinson, United States Army. He was a sergeant, later moved up to the rank of captain. Was the armored division in Korea, had a tank blown out from underneath him by a landmine. All of those individuals have recently left us, and I'm sure you Korean veterans know many, many more of your friends that you've had that have also passed away, and we want to remember them and not forget them. At this point, I'd like to draw your attention here to the very center of the forefront here. This is our the traditional prisoner of war missing in action table. Each piece of the table has a very symbolic meaning. The table is set for one. It is small, and it symbolizes the frailty of one isolated prisoner. The table is round to represent the everlasting concern on the part of the survivors for their missing loved ones. The tablecloth is white. It is symbolic of the purity of their intentions to respond to their country call to arms. The single rose in the vase reminds us of the family and friends of our missing who continue to keep the faith while awaiting their return. The red ribbon represents the love of our country which inspired them in the first place to answer the nation's call. There is a slice of lemon on the plate, and this represents the bitter fate of the missing. And the salt is sprinkled on the plate, and it is symbolic of the countless tears that have fallen by the family as they wait for their final accounting. The glass is inverted. It represents the fact that the missing and the fallen cannot partake with us today. The candle is lit, reminiscent of the light of hope which lives in our heart to illuminate their way home, away from their captors to the open arms of our grateful nation. The chair is empty. The missing and the fallen are not present here today, and it shall remain empty until all are accounted for. At this time, we have the unique honor of Lisa Sprague to present the story of her great uncle, who was missing in action and presumed dead for over 68 years, only to be repatriated. And we are very honored and very lucky to have this very unique perspective of the family to tell their story of their uncle and great uncle and family member who died so long ago. And sure, they'll say it, but I'll say it too. His items, some of the items that were recovered are on display downstairs, and it was one of the greatest honors. Kylie, who volunteered to help to put up the display, and we got to put it together, and it was probably one of the more moving and emotional displays I've ever had to put up. Knowing this individual I've never known before, but yet he's a part of this museum family forever, and we are very honored to have him here. This time, please welcome Lisa.
So welcome, it's your lucky day. I have in my possession secret information regarding the newest Hollywood blockbuster movie. It's so secret that there isn't even a title to the movie yet, but I have sneak peek photos and sound bites from the movie set. It's a romance movie and it's a war movie filled with suspense. Man meets woman, man goes to war, man's declared MIA. End of story? For many years, the world would wonder what happened to the handsome 23-year-old man who went to war with his 3 brothers and 1 brother-in-law, but never came home. He lived on in old photographs and family lore, but disappeared along a battle along the Weilerbaan Road in the Netherlands. But don't worry, this has a happy ending. Let me show you what I have. This is our leading man. His name is Gerald Kight, aka Uncle Mike. Mike was born on December 20th, 1920 in Cove, Oregon to Raymond and Nina Kight. They lived in Oregon for a few years before moving to Klickitat County, Washington. His father worked as a logger and Mike helped the family income by picking fruit. In his freshman year, he sang in the operetta and was a 4-year member of the Glee Club. He was a member of the class which graduated on the 28th of May, 1940. After graduating from high school, he joined the Civilian Conservation Corps and was sent to Alaska. Later, in August of 1942, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Soon after, the 4 brothers that would join him in fighting in World War II were Marion, Frank, which was his brother-in-law, Pat, and Shorty. But more about Mike in a minute. This is our leading lady, Olive. Olive was 18 years old and lived in Leicester, which is in the Midlands, a region of England. She lived there with her 4 elder sisters and her mother, as Olive's father had passed away 2 years prior, and she worked in a munitions factory during World War II. Her 4 sisters were married but living at home as their husbands were away fighting for their country. Olive met our leading man when Mike was 23 years old. During this time, he was stationed in barracks in Evington, which is part of Leicester. They met at a tea dance. Mike was with another American soldier, and Mike's friend decided that whoever came down the stairs first, then he would talk to her first. Olive came down the stairs second, and Mike said to her he was so pleased about that. They started dating, and Mike had some days on leave, which he spent with Olive. Olive got into trouble one day with her boss because she didn't go to work. She went to the movies instead. And she had to go before a panel and explain her actions. This was out of character to do so, as she went to church regularly and is what you would call a good girl. Mike took Olive's younger brother Billy with him to buy an engagement ring for her soon after he realized he was in love with her. It had 2 diamonds in it. Mike and Olive were allowed to sit on the front room that last night before he went away. He had secretly given a letter to Olive's mom for her to give to Olive the next day. In that letter, he told her that he was going away in the morning. He didn't know where, but that he loved her and that he would be back for her. The next morning, she heard heavy machines traveling up the main road out of the city. Months later, Olive was heartbroken when she was lured that Mike was MIA. She waited for 3 years before she would date again. Only then did she move on with her life. In 1942, Mike enlisted in the United States Army in Tacoma, Washington, and volunteered as a paratrooper. After the arduous training, he was an elite member of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne, the Devil in Baggy Pants. He arrived in England in 1944. It was there that Mike was to make his combat jump into the operation that was supposed to bring the war in Europe to an end before Christmas. It was the failed Operation Market Garden. Mike was attached to the headquarters company, 3rd Battalion, when he dropped near the town of Grave, just southwest of Nijmegen, on September 17, 1944. His unit was successful in securing the first bridge near Grave that crossed the Moss Canal, but the remaining 2 had been blown away by the Germans. Later, on September 20th, Mike was part of H&I's company famous, daring, and deadly assault across the Wall River. The 2 companies were given British assault boats that were simply canvas and wood. The Germans were able to destroy nearly half the boats on their first assault with artillery and heavy machine gun fire. Mike and the other survivors of the daring assault managed to overtake the German forces and secured the nearby bridge. 8 days later, on September 28th, PFC Kight was killed during one of the biggest and concentrated attacks on the 82nd Troopers defense line during Operation Market Garden. Over 100 Germans with many German tanks wanted to pass their position called Grutendal to attack Den Heuvel Woods, an important high ground between the 82nd drop zone and the German border. In the MIA file, it's clearly stated that Mike was the machine gunner and was ordered to relieve pressure on the I Company, which occupied the Den Heuvel Woods. His position was overrun, but because of Mike, most of his platoon members could retire. Although wounded, he used all of his ammo, even his personal weapon, a Colt 1911. Attempts were made to locate Kight through the International Red Cross in hopes that he'd been captured, but no records were found. After the war, a search of his remains and other accompanied G were made, but the search did not reveal the fate of PFC Kight. In September of 1945, the U.S. Army declared that he was missing in action and presumed dead. It was determined that Private Class Gerald W. Kight was entitled to the Bronze Star Medal, World War II Victory Medal, Army Good Conduct Medal, Purple Heart with 1 bronze oak leaf cluster, and a few other honorable recognitions. Many other people starring in this movie are family members, including Michael and Sharon Dolan, and those closely affected by the remains of World War II, even those from the Netherlands. But most affected were the 3 Musketeers. The featured member of this story are the 3 Musketeers that ultimately found Gerald Kight. Paul Guchis and his buddies, Rick and Mario, searched with their metal detectors on former battlefields. For the record, they did not search for an organization. They were just enjoying going out as 3 good friends. They collected what they found and showed these items to the locals to learn more what happened in the Groesbeck area during World War II. It started out as an innocent hobby at the age of 16, but later they purchased more heavy equipment. They had detectors that could go from 2 to 6 feet deep. They mostly would find small items, but also helmets, personal gear, and even sometimes a T5 parachute. On some occasions, the items were named, which gave them the opportunity to trace the owner. In September of 2011, they made the most important discovery of their lives. It was a sunny Sunday morning, and after walking for many hours, the detector generated a significant sound. Paul immediately realized that this was an interesting signal. When they started digging, he found some empty shells in a .30 caliber ammo box. Mario and his son Chris immediately joined, and after finding a small neck bone and locating an upper leg bone, they realized that it was a field grave. They were completely stunned and immediately stopped digging and informed the local police. A few days later, the professional team of the Royal Dutch Army excavated the field grave. The remains in this one depression, which may have been formed when a shell landed in battle, had evidence of a man lying on his back with his knees elevated. Next to the remains, they located dog tags and some personal items like a canteen, wallet, pen, and coins. They found out that the canteen had an inscription starting with the letter K. They were not allowed to read the dog tags, of course. The family should know first. But they realized the importance of this find. They were the remains of the 82nd Airborne paratrooper who liberated them but became missing in action over 67 years ago. And a unique discovery, since the last U.S. soldier who was found in this area was 1993. Almost 8 months passed before receiving news about the identity. On the 6th of May, 2012, they received a phone call which they will never forget. Out of nowhere, the farmer, Mr. Jansen, called to inform them that an American couple, Michael and Sharon Dolan, had arrived in the Groesbeck area to ask information regarding their beloved uncle who was found in September last year. Paul immediately realized that he'd finally hear the official name, Gerald W. Kight.
Your can change.
Anyway, there was supposed to be a poem. I guess I'll read it. This is actually from Paul, who found the remains. I have learned about the Second World War from my history books. This to give an impression how war looks. During that war, many souls were torn. This happened even before my father was born. We can now live in freedom because we were liberated in that war. Young men fighting in a country that they'd never known before. What went through their minds when facing the biggest threat? Seeing young people die that they previously had met. There was this big attack which became fatal for you. Many Nazi soldiers made your unit withdrew. You got wounded in a foxhole all alone, probably with thoughts of your loved one back home. Your wounds became fatal and you passed away. The field became no man's land and you were MIA. Your loved ones had to live in agony for the rest of their lives. Someday he'll return was in your mother's prayers. 67 years later, we searched with our detectors on a plowed farmland. We found human remains which were covered with sand. Our freedom became your freedom when you were found. You will soon rest in peace on your holy ground. Okay. Now you're home after so many years. You can reunite with your family. And shatter their tears.
War can change a boy from loving home and peace. Our boys that learned to be rough and tough while this mighty war was on are now plain boys of yesterday with a spirit that's far from gone. They worked and fought through cold till VE Day was won. Then in rest gave thanks to God and turned to the rising sun. Their deeds will not be forgotten, nor the heroes that were left behind to lay beneath a cross of white for peace of all mankind. For now, those who are still left with their jobs complete turn their thoughts all towards home, to their folks a sweetheart, a wife so sweet. Your boys are still no different, though they've been through living hell. Their toughness was all finished when the last invader fell.
So for the closing of this story, Uncle Mike's remains were brought back home, escorted by the Patriot Guard on May 19th, 2012.
A star that still can be seen. Mother and Daddy were left all alone as they watched all their sons march away. With tears in their eyes, they kissed them goodbye and put a star for their names. 5 stars now hang in their windows so bright, and their pictures are seen all displayed. But their hearts have been heavy all through this last year, for in Holland a son's life has been paid. For only 1 star still hangs since this cruel war been won. For the rest of us were spared and came through to help build America, for which one of us died, with peace and contentment under the red, white, and blue.
So before I close this Hollywood story, you probably guessed this really isn't a Hollywood story without a title. But I challenge each and every one of you to make up your own title. Even more, I hope that you'll tell your own true story. Document it somehow. Tell it in a venue that you find most comforting, for we all have a story to pass on. No matter how uncomfortable or taboo you may feel, please tell it so it may not be forgotten, like many of our missing men. They do say that life imitates art, and this event was graphically portrayed in the 1977 film A Bridge Too Far with Robert Redford. He played Major Julian Cook, commanding officer, 3rd Battalion, 504th PIR, 82nd Airborne, portraying the U.S. Army seizing key bridges over the Moss Wall Canal and the River Salt crossing the Wall River. A Bridge Too Far is a 1977 British-American epic war film based on the 1974 book by the same name by Cornelius Ryan. The film tells the story of the failure of Operation Market Garden during World War II. The operation was intended to allow the Allies to break through German lines and seize several bridges, including occupied Netherlands, including one in Arnhem, which is the main objective of outflanking German defenses in order to end the war by Christmas of 1944. The name of the film comes from an unconfirmed comment attributed to British Lieutenant General Frederick Brownie, Deputy Commander of the 1st Allied Airborne Army, who told Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the operations architect, before the operation, "I think we may be going a bridge too far," in reference to the intention of seizing the Arnhem bridgehead over the Rhine River. We are lucky to have Uncle Mike home, but the families who are missing someone for the past war can contact any convenient military facility to be put in touch with the service casualty officer for each military branch. They can also check to see whether they can submit a DNA sample for the accounting command's registry. See, I told you the story had a happy ending. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing that story. And as I've said, Private Kite's display is downstairs. We actually had a hard time of where to put them because it's not very often that our missing in action are fully accounted for. In fact, it's something that we should be celebrating a lot more when it does happen. It was hard. Where do we put them? Do we put them next to the POW MIA display because he's returned? Do we put him next to the POW display, even though he wasn't a prisoner of war? But instead we decided to place him alongside another one of his fellow paratroopers that served in the 82nd Airborne. And so he's down there in that row with a fellow paratrooper from his division. I was sharing with Kite's family members, one of the great things is just my job here as the museum director is getting to know just different people and people's stories. About a month ago, a family had come in from the Netherlands, and they were on family vacation. And they went through the museum and came back, and they hadn't planned on stopping here. They just saw the helicopter out there and decided let's stop by. And the father of the family shared with me that there in the Netherlands, they live next to the cemetery, and it was the Margraten Cemetery, where there was over, I believe, 32,000 American soldiers that were initially interned there, because we had a practice of not interring soldiers in occupied land, so they weren't buried in German soil, even though they may have fallen there. But most of the families had the remains exhumed and then brought back to the United States for burial. However, there's about 13,000 American servicemen that are still buried in that cemetery. And one of the programs that the government has there is that families are able to adopt a grave. And in adopting that grave, they care for the lawn around it, they care for the marker on special days of 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Veterans Day, Memorial Day. They go and they put roses on these graves as an appreciation for what these young men gave to their country in liberation. And it's okay to cry here. We do it a lot. It's perfectly fine. I want to let you know. But at the end of talking with this individual, I was crying, he was crying, his entire family was crying, because he showed me the picture of this grave and the individual's name, and he said, do you know any way of finding anything about this individual? And I said, well, I've got Ancestry.com and Fold3, and let's start doing internet research. And so what we found out was this young man who had died in May of 1945, which he thought was kind of odd because the war was over in Europe at that time. Come to find out, this individual's parents were from Austria. They had been married in 1918, and then at the end of World War I had emigrated to the United States and moved to Allentown, Pennsylvania. The father was a steel worker there in the mills. And the son was born in 1923, and of course, being born in America, he was the first American citizen of the family. And then 3 years later, his sister was born. However, she died 3 years later from tuberculosis, which left him as an only child. He worked in the steel mills, and then realizing when America was attacked, he joined the United States military, and I believe it was with the 9th Division. And he served through D-Day and through Operation Market Garden and moved all the way into occupied Germany and saw the end of the war. However, his unit was doing a river crossing as a part of the occupation, and he fell out of the boat and was dragged down by the undercurrent and drowned. This tragedy just befell a family of this poor guy that had seen so much action, yet only to die in an accident at the end of the war. And his body was interned there at the cemetery. And then we did a little more research. His mother died in 1946 of a heart attack, and the father died in 1953. And then doing more research, we found out that was it. There was no surviving family members. There may be some back in Austria, but they would have never known. And I had to tell this young man that he was the only person that had cared for this guy's grave since the 1950s that even knew anything about this young man. And I thought that was such an amazing gift, at least to me, that this Dutch family was giving to this forgotten soldier. Because they do care so much. And so individuals like these three musketeers are out there, sometimes just picking up the artifacts, but also when they do find remains, they're finding remains of American loved ones and completing the stories for so many. For those of you that don't know, the numbers vary, but it's somewhere around 83,000 American soldiers are still listed as missing in action. We do not know their fate. And yet people are out there still searching, and I think that is so commendable and fits in with our program here at the museum, where we make sure that these individuals will not be forgotten.